Gaming has evolved so much over the years that it's safe to say that we have a bright future of seeing the bar pushed on what makes a really good video game going forward. Like, from all of our favorite name developers and publishers, we just have so much cool shit to look forward to, so much actual shit. The horizon is looking pretty hopeful, but it's kind of hard to really appreciate gaming for what it is now if you don't really understand like the building blocks of what made it so good in the past to where, you know, we have this modern medium that's advanced so much from its foundation of those retro early games and consoles. And you know, you as a player might want to experience this whole classic era of gaming, but you might not want to go through the trouble of, you know, outsourcing the time to find, you know, these retro games and their inflated price tags, or these retro consoles, or maybe even using the first DualShock controller without the joysticks, because if you do enjoy doing that, you might be clinically insane. So why do all of that when you could likely use a device that you have just laying around at your fingertips that's compatible to perform a modern day witchcraft known as emulation? That's right, emulation. Now, the word emulation kind of has a bad connotation, at least for, you know, casual fans looking from the outside in, because many people associate big name brands like Nintendo for going after them and fighting a whole ass, you know, great ninja war over this freaking 9-letter word. And to be fair, you know, there is a lot of illegalness that is, you know, associated with the whole world of emulation, but the act of emulating itself is not illegal. It's like a gun, you know, it all depends on how you're using it in the parameters of safety. Well, not really, but you know what I mean. In short, the good and bad of emulation comes in, you know, where you're getting your games from, whether you're legally getting them or, you know, legally already owning them. But I've talked about, you know, emulation broadly before in a recent video I did talking about, you know, how handhelds themselves can make your gaming, you know, so much better. And in that video, I only allocated like 1 or 2 sentences to briefly, you know, mention how PC gaming handhelds specifically can open up an entire gateway to, you know, legally questionable emulation tactics. But this time I want to talk about the entire broad scale of emulation, the good and the bad, you know, give you guys some decent options for emulators if you know, want to check them out for yourselves, and ultimately how this side of gaming can, you know, save the medium for people that might want to play these older games, or in some cases the current lineup of titles but on a different platform in a more convenient way possible. So how the hell can you even emulate? Because another connotation that this word has is that emulating is just an overall hard thing to do. And I'm not gonna lie, sometimes it can be, you know, I might cast a bad spell, but I'll never tell you a fairy tale. And honestly, it gets this rap because when most people think of emulators, they think of the PC platform emulators where you have the most options and, you know, just a sheer abundance of different ways to emulate on PC. So of course, you know, why don't we start there and assume that anytime that I'm talking about, you know, emulating on PC, I also apply this to, you know, PC gaming handhelds, since it's basically a whole computer in your palms. But yeah, PC emulators are arguably like the best way to get into this whole hobby of emulation, since just finding and getting an emulator on this platform is probably easier here than anywhere else, because you could literally just go to any free and open source website that, you know, hosts these emulators and just click it as a download just like that. The only catch is, or at least where your responsibility comes in as a player, is that you have to provide your own game files, meaning that, you know, whatever the base form that the game that you want to play comes in, whether it's like a ROM or a package file or whatever it is, you have to provide that. And, you know, they're assuming that legally you have these games already, so you can just like transfer the game that you want to play from your, you know, physical copy of that game and, you know, just put it on the emulator that way instead of doing something illegal, in theory. Now, on the contrary to what I just said, you know, the most broad appeal of all emulation, but especially on PC where you have just already an abundance of games on that platform alone, is just the convenience of having every single console, platform, or game that you could ever want on one system, which is just amazing. And on PC, through like simple searches, you'll find emulators for basically every single console and platform up to around the 8th generation, meaning like the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch era. Everything before that, you will find some sort of emulator for, you know, those games. And even going forward, there's going to be even more consoles being supported, like the PlayStation 5, which is being tested right now by many people who are really deep into this whole emulation thing. So the whole act of emulation is only going to get better and better as time goes on. Like just having that vast library at the click of a mouse is one of the coolest things that you could like ever just fathom. And even if you have like one single controller, like one Xbox controller, most of these emulators are built in to like, you know, translate those controls for whatever controller that you have. So even if you don't have the native controller for whatever game you're playing, you still will have that accessibility option that makes this so much better. But then again, circling back to what I hinted at before, the only not so convenient thing about these emulators on PC at least is setting them up, because once again, you have to provide your own freaking game ROM or game file, which, you know, transferring that is a specific process no matter, you know, what freaking platform you have. So that can be annoying to do. Plus you have the responsibility of actually, you know, finding and owning these titles if you don't already have them in your collection. But within these emulators themselves, if something goes wrong with, you know, running the game, you basically have to be like a mini Linus Tech Tips and just figure out what it is on your own, because, you know, you are going to have all the settings for like all the graphics, all the shaders, like all of that stuff. If you don't have like a good grasp on what it is, it can be really easy to get lost in the sauce. But at the same time, having all that option can also be like a really good experience if you do understand, you know, what you're looking at, because now that you have options of all these shaders and graphics, you can upscale the game however you want to. Most of these emulators like RPCS3, the PlayStation 3 emulator, has built-in features to toggle like cheats if the game already has that, so you know you don't have to worry about those types of things. It's a learning curve is what I'm trying to get at, but you'll find these kinds of settings in a whole bunch of different emulators for PC, like Zenmu, which does Xbox, original Xbox emulation, Project 64, which does N64 emulation, PPSSPP does PlayStation Portable. If you have a console that's below the 8th generation, you will find it anywhere on the internet, likely for free. Now, the way that I'm hyping up emulation, I'm speaking in the best case scenario to where everyone, I'm assuming, is supplying their own games. You know, they actually own these titles and they're just dumping it onto the emulator themselves. But I'm not naive to understand that shit is just not the majority case. People are not living up to respect those piracy is a crime acts from the 2000s. Now listen, I'm not endorsing anything, but for the people that aren't afraid to walk that virtual life of, you know, online criminal activity, if you do, you basically have an entire access to every game for every platform that I listed that has an emulator on PC at any point in time. And dude, that fact alone makes this side of gaming just that much more enticing, for the same reason that people, you know, pirate games on the regular basis. You know, you're trying to tell me I could pay $60 for a game that came out 70 years ago, or I could pay nothing? Of course, though, that criminal lifestyle doesn't come without its challenges when you're downloading, you know, freehold games from the below the surface web, and you have to deal with things like, you know, navigating fake links on these websites, the sketchy links, all the virus downloads that you might accidentally come across. But even then, at this point, a lot of people walk this illegitimate path of life on the internet. So even then, you still have all these safeguarded methods that people have garnered in the community of, you know, emulating in general on various websites like Reddit, to where you have these whole freaking guides on how you can, as safely as possible, traverse these sketchy websites, which I know nothing about. I have no idea what Reddit thread, what's a Reddit thread, what? But no matter where you get your emulated games on PC, the fact remains that, you know, no matter what you choose, you're going to have the abundance of options and platforms to just sheer amount of emulation at your fingertips. But of course, emulation isn't only exclusive to the PC platform, and arguably one of the most convenient ways to emulate a game is probably on the most intimate device that you ever have in your life, and likely the one that you're using to watch this video on right now, being your smartphone or maybe your tablet or whatever, you know, mobile device that you have that you can transport easily with you. Now listen, I used to be really big on mobile gaming in like 2014 when all I had was like a Kindle Fire to my name. I didn't have anything else, dark time of my life. So while I'm not too far up on the game anymore, I have retained the knowledge to know that pretty much every retro 8-bit, 16-bit, and even 3D game up to like the 6th generation of consoles being like the PlayStation 2 and GameCube era, you can find an emulated, you know, platform to use on your smartphone devices. And the whole process of getting your games on there is essentially in, you know, the same fashion, where you can either dump your games or illegally download them. Now, generally, I can't really speak for Apple devices, since I do know that Android usually has much more customization and more flexibility, as you know, more comparable to like a PC platform where you have just that much more control and downloads. But I'm pretty sure that every major emulator that you will find on Android, you'll be able to find somewhere on iOS devices, because remember last year there was this whole craze of, you know, the Game Boy emulator being on the iPhone, so you know, I'm pretty sure it's there too. But yeah, man, I think people really do underestimate just how powerful and capable that, you know, most modern phones are. You know, at least people aren't really paying attention to it, to what I see, because after like that whole craze of, you know, smartphone games died out in like the mid 2010s or wherever, the last time you played like Clash of Clans or something, people kind of turned away. But phones are much more capable and even have their own freaking gaming line of freaking smartphones now, that they're porting whole ass AAA games to freaking Apple iPhones. Like a regular iPhone can run, what was it, like the latest Resident Evil or something like that. So with that, these things are more than capable of being probably the most convenient emulator that you'll ever need in life. But let's just say portability and, you know, just sheer amount of option isn't a big factor for you. You also have console emulation, which people tend to kind of forget is more common than most people really think. And I say that because when older games get ports to like modern titles, a lot of times they have a built-in emulator inside them, just so that they can, you know, translate the controls and all the graphics to fit the game perfectly, so that there's no compatibility issues. Now, the actual quality of this built-in emulator depends on, you know, how much the developer of the game gave a shit to, you know, make this port as good as possible. But that's just me talking technicalities. If you want to talk about actual like external third-party emulators on console, you do have like some specific examples, like how the Xbox Series consoles, if you buy the $20 dev kit, you have access to be able to put apps on the system like the Dolphin emulator for the Wii and GameCube games. This was a trend that we saw a lot of during the first year of the Xbox Series consoles, and for a while it was kind of dubbed as, you know, the big emulation freaking console for Nintendo games. And I believe in recent memory that's the only easy way to get a third-party emulator on a modern console, with the only alternative to be, you know, the old-fashioned method of just, you know, jailbreaking your system, to which emulating at that point is just only a small leaf in a big tree of just a whole bunch of illegal schemes that you'll be able to pull off jailbreaking a whole system. Like, that's just a whole bag of shit. So truth be told, it doesn't really matter how you emulate a title, because most of the time you're likely going to be saving both time and money. But even still, I do believe that there's a worthy argument to be made about how, you know, there's something prideful about playing a game on its, you know, original console, like playing Final Fantasy VI on PlayStation 1. You know, having those kinds of experiences are obviously amazing, but if you just want to experience a game in the most convenient way possible, you might not have either the funds or just the patience to wait to get, you know, that whole console or those whole games. Emulation can, you know, save a lot of time and overall just save your gaming. And that's all that I got for today, man. If you enjoyed, leave a like on the video, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.